Caution! The AJ and Quill show contains D&D content and is intended for a D&D audience. And, besides that, they're really weird. Hi everyone, welcome to Total Party Quill, Monster Tactics for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. I'm your friendly neighborhood tiefling, AJ. This is my buddy, Quill the Dragon. Say hi, Quill.
Greetings, puny humans. Prepare to absorb the knowledge Quill will dispense with his mighty jaws.
Awesome. Speaking of knowledge, what are we talking about today?
Orcs.
Right. Orcs are
delicious.
What?
Delicious. Tastes like green ham. Where do you think Dr. Seuss got the idea?
Anyway, orcs are also a 1/2 of 1 CR humanoid creature that can be found on page 264 of the Monster Manual. There's a few different varieties of orc listed there, but because their stats are all pretty simple, we're just going to include them all in one video. So let's break down their stat profile. Quill?
Orcs have a high strength, high constitution, but a much lower, more average dex. This is the physical profile of a melee tank.
Right. So a melee tank is just what we're going to call something that runs into combat, starts hitting things, and doesn't really move. Orcs also have something called the aggressive trait, which, in a nutshell, lets them dash as a bonus action to a hostile creature that they see in combat. So this is how combat plays out for an average orc. If they're within 30 feet when combat begins, they use their movement to get to melee range, and they start hitting whatever it is with their great axe. If they're between 30 and 60 feet away, they'll use their aggressive trait as a bonus action to close the distance to melee and then do the exact same thing. If they're unable to get to melee range using all their movement and their aggressive trait, instead they'll get as close as they possibly can and then use their javelins. According to the Monster Manual, you can assume that every creature carries 2d4 pieces of thrown ammunition. So just assume that every orc has 4 javelins on them. What's interesting though is orcs actually have stats and do a social skill. It's intimidation. And since we assume that if it's in the stat block that it's there for a reason, you as a DM should be able to create an opportunity for some kind of social interaction with your players. Granted, this is intimidation, so that social interaction will usually be taunts and threats. But it's still something that you can make available. This actually plays out really well in one of the Fells 5 comic series, where the main character was surrounded by a horde of orcs, and he knew he was going to lose, so instead of fighting them or just waiting for a battle of attrition, he challenged the orc leader to physical combat. The rules were if he won, then they would get to go free, and if he lost, they would surrender half their people as a sacrifice, and then the orcs would go. These kind of things can make simple combat with orcs, especially at lower level, a lot more interesting and more fun to play out for a role player.
Despite their aggression and their stupidity, orcs know when they're beaten in combat. When they reach 1/4 of their hit points, orcs suffer a morale failure and try to disengage from combat.
And what they do after they disengage depends kind of on how many you're facing. If the majority of the other orcs are still up and standing and fighting, that one who's at 1/4 of his hit points will simply back off and throw javelins. If the majority of the orcs have already either fled combat or are dead or down, then that orc will instead flee with them. Keep in mind it is up to the DM about whether or not these orcs will try to flee combat. Some orcs are fanatical and they'll just fight to the death. Other orcs, because they worship the god of slaughter, which is Gruumsh, might simply stay in combat for honor's sake or because they believe that's what the god would want. Other orcs would refuse to leave combat simply as a mark of honor.
Orogs can be found on page 247 of the Monster Manual. Think of them as CR2 regular orcs. They're tougher, they're more intelligent, but they play the exact same way. An orc war chief is a CR4 humanoid creature. It's like a much stronger, more durable, more intelligent regular orc. But they have a multi-attack and 2 extra abilities. The first is Gruumsh's Fury, a passive damage bonus. The next is Battle Cry. It grants advantage to the Orc War Chief's allies within 30 feet once per day. Then it allows the Orc War Chief to make 1 attack as a bonus action. The Orc War Chief charges into combat with the rest of its group, but does its battle cry first, getting as many of its allies in its radius as possible. Then it begins attacking much like a regular orc.
Lastly, we have something called the Eye of Gruumsh. This is an orc priest that basically functions like a buffer, debuffer, and much less like a healer because they don't actually have any healing spells.
Their physical stats are identical to a regular orc, but they are much more intelligent, wise, and charismatic. It is a 3rd level wisdom spellcaster.
And while they have a bunch of spells on their list, we're only going to cover the ones that we think will come up in combat, namely Bless, Spiritual Weapon, and Command. So an Eye of Gruumsh will do exactly like all the other arcs do and charge into combat, using its aggressive trait if necessary. However, the Eye of Gruumsh will stay about 20 feet back, if possible, from the actual melee combat, and instead, on the first round, will cast Bless, trying to get its most powerful allies in the radius, also including itself. In the second round of combat, the Orc Eye of Gruumsh uses a 2nd level spell slot to cast Spiritual Weapon and attacks with that. But since Spiritual Weapon only uses a bonus action, it uses its own actions to instead hold an attack in case an enemy creature comes within 5 feet of it, in which case it will attack it with its spear. On the 3rd round of combat, what the Orc Eye of Gruumsh will do is use the hold action again, but this time it's going to cast the command spell using its remaining 2nd level spell slot. This will affect an additional creature. It'll hold that spell until an enemy creature's turn so that it can interrupt or somehow debuff that creature as it's attacking its allies. For example, if it notices that a heavy melee fighter is attacking one of its fellow orcs, it'll cast the drop command, in which case the creature will drop its weapon and end its turn. It could also cast the command spell to flee if it notices that an enemy creature is engaged with 2 or more of its own orcs, thus prompting opportunity attacks as it runs from combat. It'll keep doing this until it runs out of spell slots, after which it will engage in melee combat just like every other orc. And that's about it. We hope this helps you get started with some monster tactics for orcs in Dungeons & Dragons 5e. And we wanted to apologize to our special guest tonight, Joe Manganello. Sorry bud, we couldn't get you on tonight, we just ran out of time. So to send us off, here's Quill's joke of the day. Quill?
Why did the orc cross the road?
I give up. Why did the orc cross the road?
Because the road crossed him first.
Anyway, say goodbye, Quill.
Goodbye, Quill.
And don't forget to join us next time when our special guest will be Critical Role's Travis Willingham. Wonderful guy.
Amazing guy.
Bye.
Yeah, 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 yeah.